A genetic connection has been uncovered, but no one's talking about it. Julia Wendell may be linked to the Madeleine McCann case, and new evidence has simply been brushed aside. Today, you'll understand why this silence is so unsettling, and what might happen if this truth comes to light. Imagine a DNA test landing on a table like a forgotten envelope. Not the kind that brings answers, but the kind that carries more silence than certainty. A cold room, fluorescent light, hesitant hands holding a printed sheet. Someone takes a deep breath, reads the numbers, and stops, says nothing, just folds the report in half, slips it into a drawer, and turns the key. No one mentions it, no public report, no reporter comments. The data is there, alive, present, uncomfortable. And instead of sparking outrage, investigation, or even a footnote, it's swallowed by the system, vanished as if it never existed. Now take a deep breath with me. What if that report showed a partial match between Julia Wendell and the DNA of one of Madeleine McCann's parents? No, this isn't fiction. It's documented. A genetic marker, a technical, cold, emotionless link. But when interpreted, it wasn't debunked. It was ignored. What would you do if you found a possible bridge between two stories the world treated as unconnected? If you saw an invisible thread linking a girl missing for decades to a young woman searching for her identity, you know what they did? They laughed. And then, silence. This is where it all starts to get loud. Why did silence come exactly when evidence appeared? Why was the story discredited faster than any analysis was verified? And why does no one want to pull this thread? There's something deeply cruel about looking at someone begging to be heard and turning away. Julia didn't scream. She searched, she tested, she waited. And when a result emerged, not a final answer but a concrete lead, she was treated as a joke, an exaggeration, a fraud. The pain here isn't in certainty, it's in abandonment, in the rush to dismiss a question before investigating it, in the institutional exhaustion of those who'd rather bury questions than dig for answers. And in the midst of it all, there's a young woman who might, just might, hold the thread connecting past and present, but no one wants to touch it, because if that connection is real, everything we think we know crumbles. This story isn't about belief, it's about what they won't even let you consider. There's something in this result that unsettles those controlling the narrative. And if you stay with me now, you'll understand why. Subscribe, because what's coming next wasn't meant to be shared. It was meant to be forgotten. The truth is, the Madeleine McCann case was never just about a missing child. From the start, something felt off, like a thread pulling from within, but no one saw it. The initial investigation stumbled on flaws that, in any other context, would have collapsed the case entirely. Poorly preserved crime scenes, real-time shifts in statements, and media coverage that seemed more focused on protecting reputations than finding answers. And despite all that, the narrative rolled on as if unquestionable. Innocent parents, dedicated police, no solid leads, the end. But then, years later, Julia Wendell emerges, a young woman with an unstable past, scars that don't match her story, and fragmented memories pointing in an unsettling direction. And what does the system do? It discredits her before investigating. They call it delusion, a grab for fame, impossible. Except there's one detail almost no one saw or pretended not to see. Julia didn't just seek help, she took a test, a genetic test, and part of that result pointed to a possible match. Not a final proof, not a conclusion, but a lead that, in a missing person case like this, deserved immediate attention. What happened? Silence. The same old pattern. When the thread threatens to become a lifeline, someone cuts it first. On the surface, everything stays calm. But behind the scenes, the tension grows. The same tension that's been there since 2007. Because when someone gets too close to the truth, when the invisible thread starts to take shape, it's no coincidence that the stage goes dark and the story vanishes from headlines. Julia isn't an expert. She's not a journalist. She's not a cop. But she had something many professionals in this case never dared to have: persistence. And maybe that's why she became so dangerous to those who want this story locked in a controlled past. She sought out institutes, sent samples, answered interviews. And the most curious part is that when the first evidence with the potential to reopen the conversation emerged, a partial genetic link to the McCann family, no one, absolutely no one with real power, wanted to take it further. What if it's a technical error, they asked. What if it's a hoax, they suggested. But no one said, let's investigate too quick to be mere neglect. It was strategic, Because if that match were confirmed with deeper scrutiny, there'd be too many consequences to manage. And not just for Julia, but for everyone involved from the start. Prosecutors, detectives, forensic experts, media outlets. And that's where the real conflict begins. Because now we're not just talking about a young woman searching for identity. We're talking about what happens when a scientific fact threatens an entire system of narratives. Julia became the mirror of what the McCann case always avoided confronting, the possibility that the truth wasn't lost, but hidden. And what's most unsettling about this new chapter is that it was smothered with the same precision used to disarm a bomb, cutting the right wire before it could detonate. But the problem is, some wires, even when cut, keep carrying a charge. And that's what makes this story pulse. Because while the world tries to forget, something insists on connecting. What if this link they tried to erase is still alive, waiting for the right moment to be seen? Sometimes all the system fears most is someone deciding to pull that thread to the end. What started as an intimate search for identity became an uncomfortable whisper in corridors that prefer silence. Julia Wendell's genetic analysis wasn't done casually or at home. She sent material to a reputable company. The results showed something that, in any other context, would have made headlines. A significant genetic marker. A partial match with a European lineage close to the McCann family. It wasn't a verdict, but it was, without a doubt, a starting point. And that's when the mood shifted. The same media that thrives on twists chose to pretend nothing happened. No public investigation, no call for a retest, no in-depth analysis from authorities. The institutional narrative stayed frozen, as if a relevant technical finding was just background noise. Behind the scenes, those who tried to pursue it found doors closed. Sources that once spoke went silent. Experts who could have analyzed the data refused. And the question that started echoing among the few who paid attention was too direct to be comfortable. If this evidence is worthless, why are they so desperate to bury it? The silence no longer felt like exhaustion. It felt like fear, an old fear, the kind that already knows the taste of truth and prefers not to try it again. And the most disturbing part, it wasn't the first time. In other cases, when new technical evidence threatened the balance of an official narrative, whether through DNA or process contradictions, the first reaction was always the same: isolate, invalidate, discredit. And now with Julia, the pattern repeated. Except this time something was different. The invisible thread started to glow, and those who saw it couldn't unsee it. Imagine a locked room. Inside, 3 people analyze a printed report, a test with cold, objective letters. But among the numerical codes and cross-reference alleles, one detail stands out: a compatibility that shouldn't exist. A possible genetic link between Julia Wendell and the McCann family. The kind of information that, in a normal case, would force the reopening of files, the review of statements, the summoning of experts. But in that room, no one moves. One says, "It's not enough." Another replies, "Let's avoid unnecessary noise." The third just tears the paper in half, as if it were just another inconvenient datum in what they prefer to call a conspiracy theory. And the question returns, heavy, dense, throbbing. Why is something that could bring answers treated as a threat? Julia on the outside waits, and when she gets no response, she starts to understand what she's really up against. It's not just disbelief, it's the weight of a system that's already decided this case needs to stay closed, and any new piece on the board will be discarded before it can create movement. But then comes the part almost no one expected. By sharing the data publicly, Julia does what no mainstream outlet dared. She breaks the cycle. People start comparing details, connecting dots, seeking similar tests. The invisible thread begins to be pulled by hands outside the system, by those who just want to understand. And that's when everything almost changes. Because for a moment, the truth threatens to step out of the shadows. The tension is no longer about whether Julia is or isn't Madeleine. The real tension lies in another layer, the collective fear of what that answer might mean. Reopening the case, revisiting culprits, exposing omissions, toppling narratives. And at that moment, the truth stops being an answer and becomes a danger. Some things only those who felt the silence up close understand. Some truths don't scare for what they reveal, but for what they force us to face. What if the only thing keeping the truth from surfacing? Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive like an explosion. It seeps in silently, like a slow leak in old plumbing. First the stain, then the bulge in the wall, until the moment everything collapses. With Julia Wendell, the crack appeared, and when the light broke through, it was too late to pretend nothing had been seen. The genetic evidence wasn't definitive, but it wasn't irrelevant either. It was a tenuous line, a thread insisting on linking two names that should never be in the same sentence. And that thread wasn't cut by chance. It was hidden, carefully folded and locked in a symbolic file called convenience. Julia didn't react like a victim or an opportunist. She reacted like someone who suddenly realized the problem wasn't proving who she was, but enduring what it meant for others if she was right. That shifts her role in the story. Not as the lost girl who might have been found, but as the mirror of a system that doesn't want to find anything, just maintain what's already been accepted. The media's reaction wasn't surprise, it was irritation. Instead of headlines like, "New genetic evidence reopens suspicions," there were cold titles, "New hoax, theory dismissed, another publicity stunt," as if the fear was less about a lie and more about what might be true. And the public, once split between empathy and mockery, started to shift. Questions emerged that hadn't existed before. Why weren't the data reevaluated? Why didn't any authority request a new cross-check? And why does the silence feel so carefully orchestrated? You read about this, right? Yeah, but it seems like no one wants to talk about it. It's like it's not convenient. This exchange happened in a real leaked message between two journalists, and it shows exactly where the real focus of the story lies. The evidence wasn't buried for lack of proof. It was pushed into oblivion for lack of will. Here, the conflict resolves in reverse. It's not the answer that closes the story. It's the question no one had the courage to ask. What if it's not about believing or doubting Julia? What if it's about admitting that in this case, the investigation never went as far as it should have? At this point, the symbol gained strength. The invisible thread. It was there all along, tying together points that seemed too far apart to touch. But once you see it, there's no going back. You can't pretend the connection doesn't exist. And that's the hardest part, because the connection unsettles. Truth, when it's uncomfortable, doesn't make headlines. It makes silence. But silence is also an answer. And when it repeats, instead of closing a story, it becomes the loudest clue. The pattern of concealment, the repetition of closed doors, the same discrediting speeches, all fit together, piece by piece, as if someone were trying to assemble a puzzle backward. Not to reveal the full picture, but to hide what it shows. And now, with everything that's been said, the question is no longer, who is Julia Wendell? The real question is, who doesn't want us to find out? This is the point where the viewer no longer needs an answer. Because the value of the story isn't in offering a clean conclusion, it's in provoking the kind of unease that doesn't fade with time. And it's that unease that transforms. Julia pressed on. Not with fame, not with relief, but with the weight of knowing there's a part of her that maybe no one wants to acknowledge, and another part that many will never forget. In the end, the genetic thread that could have sparked a new investigation became a crack in the concrete of a narrative deemed resolved. And that's the detail no one can undo. You can ignore a coincidence, you can doubt a story, but you can't erase the trace of someone who tried to tell the truth and was silenced for it. And if after all this, you're still here, it's because that thread passed through you too. Some stories we don't tell just to understand, but to remind us that what unsettles might be exactly what needs to be said. Truth, when it's too inconvenient, doesn't need to be debunked. It just needs to be discredited until no one wants to hear it anymore. That's what happened with Julia. That's what happened with the new genetic evidence. And more than that, that's what happened with every thread that tried to stitch together a version different from the official story. One by one, cut before they could become a connection. But something changed, because this time, the thread appeared where it was least expected, and it was no longer possible to pretend it wasn't there. Silence, truth grows stronger when it finds an echo. And what this case shows, with brutal clarity, is that the omission was meticulous. That there was a decision not to seek answers, but to protect uncomfortable questions from being asked. The thread linking Julia to Madeleine may not be definitive, react with apathy, but with effort. A calculated effort to ensure the connection didn't become an investigation. That, to me, says more than any report. Because when the fear of investigating outweighs the fear of being wrong, we already know something much bigger is being protected. And I say this with the calm of someone who's not here to accuse or defend, but to look straight at the uncomfortable truth most prefer to sidestep. Because it's there, even when we try to ignore it. The question is no longer whether Julia is or isn't Madeleine. The question is, what does this case reveal about what we accept without questioning? This invisible thread stitching together names, dates, pieces of a puzzle left behind. It was never just about genetic identification. It was always about the discomfort of recognizing that maybe the official story, the one printed in newspapers and cemented in documentaries, is more committed to calm than to truth. And maybe, just maybe, the mistake wasn't in those who sought the wrong answers, but in those who didn't have the courage to ask the right questions. If you've made it this far, you might have felt what I did, that there's something in this story that still pulses, that still tries to breathe, even under all this piled up silence. And if that's what you feel, you're not alone. This channel exists for this, to tell the stories they tried to silence, to pull, thread by thread, what seemed buried. And if you want to keep following this line with me, subscribe. Because the next video is more than a sequel, it's a direct continuation of this open wound. We'll talk about another case where the truth was so inconvenient, they tried to erase it with protocol. And I'm not saying this to hook your attention. I'm saying it because, honestly, some stories only make sense when you listen with an open heart. And this is one of them. If you believe the truth needs to be spoken, even when it scares, leave your mark here. The super chat isn't just support, it's a sign, a gesture, like saying, I was here, I heard, and I don't accept silence as an answer. Every super chat is a knot in this invisible thread we're pulling together. And when those knots pile up, it's no longer possible to pretend the thread doesn't exist. You can write, I stand for the truth, or just leave a phrase of your own, a fragment of what you felt. Because sometimes the strongest truth comes in the simplest words. Now, I want to know what this stirred in you. What did you see that maybe I couldn't even say? Write it, even if it's just a line. But let it be true, because some things only those who felt it understand. And some silences are only broken when we speak together. And if you watched until here, comment, I'm the one who won't stay silent. I'll read every single one, because those who stayed until the end of this thread are already part of the story. And remember one thing, not every silence is forgetting. Some are just waiting for the right voice. And if today it was yours that lit up, then thank you. We'll meet at the next thread.